Hello kids, welcome to the Dream Journey. Today we are going to tell a new story about a hidden song, a lonely prince, and a magical bird made not of feathers, but of golden gears and music. Close your eyes and imagine this. A castle so big it has hallways like rivers, staircases that twist like vines, and an attic filled with forgotten things. Dusty books, quiet trunks, and the smell of time itself. And in one little corner of that attic, tucked beneath a faded blanket, waits something very special. Prince Finn wasn't like the others in his royal family. While his brothers jousted and his sisters practiced harpsichord, Finn wandered quietly, unnoticed, through the palace's quieter corners. One rainy afternoon, when thunder grumbled like a sleepy bear, Finn climbed a creaky staircase up into the attic. The door moaned on its hinges, and the air was thick with memories. He explored the forgotten treasures, old toys, paintings with sleepy eyes, and boxes full of things no one remembered. That's when he saw it. A small wooden box, polished but worn, sat beneath a crooked window. Inside it, nestled in velvet, lay a clockwork bird, a nightingale, its body made of gold and silver, with gears like lace and tiny jeweled eyes. Finn's breath caught. He wound the little key on its side, and with a soft click, the bird opened its beak. A song poured out, soft, sweet, and full of something old, something real. The melody filled the attic and echoed down the stairwell, as if the walls themselves were remembering how to listen. Finn cradled the bird in both hands. He didn't know why, but it felt like he'd just met an old friend. One who remembered things even he didn't know he'd forgotten. Prince Finn had always been there, but not quite seen. At banquets, he sat quietly at the long end of the table where the candlelight flickered out. At royal processions, his name was spoken last, if at all. He didn't mind much, not really. He liked silence, the way it let thoughts grow like moss in shaded places. But sometimes in the deep hours of night, he wished someone would look at him the way people looked at the grand clock, with awe, with attention, with belief that he mattered. His siblings sparkled like jewels in the crown of the palace. There was Princess Celeste, always surrounded by admirers, laughing like silver bells. There were the twin princes, Roland and Rian, who dueled with wooden swords and could recite courtly speeches from memory. Even the smallest cousin, who could barely walk, received more doting than Finn. The queen loved all her children, but she carried the kingdom in her thoughts. Her smiles often stretched too thin. The king was always busy, his footsteps rhythmic but distant, echoing down hallways Finn rarely dared follow. The staff were kind but always in a rush. They greeted him like a shadow, noticed but passed through. So Finn wandered. He knew which hallway tiles clicked loose underfoot, where the walls whispered when the wind blew. He knew the smell of parchment in the unused study, and the way the garden gates sighed open on cloudy days. But when he found the nightingale, something shifted. For the first time someone responded. The little bird had looked at him with jeweled eyes and sung only when he held it. Its song curled around him like a thread, tying a knot in a heart that had been floating for too long. Finn didn't have words for it yet, but the palace had started to notice him. Not the people, not just yet, but the walls, the air, the quiet, listening spaces. And that, for now, was enough. It was early the next morning when Finn found himself walking softly down the eastern corridor toward his mother's sitting room. The Clockwork Nightingale rested in his pocket, warm like a heartbeat. He hadn't meant to go to her, not really, but his feet had followed a quiet pull. The queen sat near the window, her shoulders tense as she read through scrolls of court affairs. A fire crackled, untouched tea steaming beside her. She hadn't noticed Finn slip in, nor the bird perched in his hands. Finn wound the key once, gently. Blick. Breath. In music. The nightingale sang again, this time softer than before. A delicate, tender tune, like a lullaby remembered not with words, but with feeling. The melody unfurled into the air, curling toward the queen like a ribbon on the breeze. Her hand stopped moving. She looked up, blinking as if pulled from a dream. Her eyes searched the room and settled on Finn. "Where did you?" she began, but her voice caught. The music wove around her. And something in her face, tight and far away just a moment ago, unfolded. She leaned back in her chair, her breath deeper now, as if something invisible had loosened. "I haven't heard that feeling in years," she said quietly. Finn stepped closer. She reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the bird's wing, delicate and reverent. Then, for the first time in days, perhaps longer, she smiled. Real one. Not the royal one, not the tired one, but the kind that reached her eyes and lingered. "You always did find hidden things," she whispered, more to herself than to him. They didn't say much more. They didn't need to. The room held the music like a hush, like a shared secret. The fire crackled. The wind stirred the curtains. And for once, the queen didn't look through Finn. She saw him. That same evening, just as the last edge of sunlight kissed the palace towers, a strange sound echoed through the corridors. A stutter, a groan, and then silence. It came from the grand royal clock, the great mechanism that hung above the throne hall, taller than a man and older than memory. First no one noticed. But then the rhythm of the palace began to falter. The bells chimed out of order. The kitchen ovens lit too early. The guards at the gates blinked in confusion when their relief didn't arrive. And in the great halls, the tick, 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 that always hummed beneath everything was gone. The grand clock had stopped. Courtiers rushed with charts and tools. Royal engineers were summoned from their rooms, their hair wild with sleep. Ladders clattered against marble. The king stood beneath the great face of the clock, arms crossed, jaw tight. The queen, too, watched in silence, her fingers laced at her waist. Finn stood behind a column, watching. The nightingale rested against his chest in a little cloth sling he'd tied around himself. It hadn't sung since that morning, but it was still warm, pulsing gently like it was listening. The grown-ups talked of gears and timing chains, of alignment errors and balance wheels. But even as they poked and prodded the clock's mighty guts, something deeper remained untouched. Finn could feel it. The palace had shifted, not just in its hours but in its heart. There was a different kind of quiet now, not the peaceful kind. This one hummed with unease. And somehow he knew. This wasn't just a broken machine. It was a forgotten song, skipped in the great rhythm of things. Not something to be repaired with tools, but something to be remembered. He looked down at the bird, and the bird looked up at him. They would find the rhythm, not on the clock's face, but somewhere deeper, quieter. The palace buzzed with ticking minds and clattering tools. Engineers, clocksmiths, and scholars in velvet robes filled the halls with charts, diagrams, and murmurs. Brass tools gleamed under lamplight, and gears of every size spun on tabletops in hopes of revealing the grand clock's secret fault. But none of it worked. The hours passed strangely now. Meals came too soon or far too late. Footsteps echoed at odd times. The rhythm of everything, the rhythm no one had noticed until it vanished, was lost. Finn wandered through it, all like a breeze between curtains. No one asked where he was going. They never had. He watched the adults cluster around the grand clock. They spoke in low voices, adjusting things with precise fingers. But the clock didn't stir. Its silence remained stubborn and heavy, like a song refusing to play. As Finn passed the music room, its doors long shut and layered in dust. He paused. The nightingale gave a soft click in its sleep. It was subtle, but it stirred something in Finn's chest. They weren't fixing the rhythm. They were trying to force it. That night, as moonlight spilled like milk across the stone floors, Finn sat on the library steps, tracing the shapes of old carvings with his finger. The nightingale blinked open and sang, not a song of celebration or command, but a quiet, thoughtful tune. A tune that felt like searching. And Finn understood. The kingdom didn't need the tick-tock of perfect minutes. Needed something else. The little gentle things that kept people going. Smiles in passing, humming in the corridors, stories at bedtime. Things no one had measured but everyone had felt. If the clock's heart had stopped, it wasn't because it was broken. It was because something had been forgotten. And so, Finn decided he would not follow the grown-ups with their gears and guesses. He and the nightingale would follow the music. The next morning, with the palace still wrapped in uncertainty, Finn slipped into the eastern wing, a quiet stretch of hallways where the walls hummed with echoes. No one went there anymore. The portraits had faded, and the floors creaked like they were remembering footsteps that hadn't passed in years. The nightingale stirred in his sling. Finn wound it gently. It clicked once, then opened its wings with a whisper of metal. A melody began, not grand, not sorrowful, but curious. It danced between the stone arches like a child on tiptoe. As the notes unfurled, the hallway changed. Dust swirled into sunlight. A velvet curtain, stiff for years, swayed gently as if sighing. The song filled every corner, and in its wake, small things happened. Unnoticed but important. A maid passing by slowed her steps, listening. A young page, usually anxious and stiff, sat down beside a cold fireplace and hummed along without realizing. Somewhere above, a window clicked open just a little, letting in the smell of garden jasmine. The nightingale's music didn't fix the gears of the clock, but it tuned something else, something quieter. A hallway that remembered laughter. A servant who remembered joy. A silence that had forgotten how to sing. Finn kept walking, letting the music guide him. The palace felt different beneath his feet, like the floor itself was breathing again. Not everything needed to be loud to matter. He stopped beneath a high arch where a forgotten mural spanned the ceiling. It showed stars, constellations, and a silver bird flying over a sleeping kingdom. He hadn't noticed it before. No one had pointed it out. But now, with the nightingale's song in the air, it shimmered slightly, faded paint catching the light. Finn smiled. The palace wasn't just a building. It was a memory, a melody waiting to be played again. And he was learning how to listen. The song carried Finn through corridors that hadn't heard footsteps in years. He wandered past shuttered drawing rooms, unused guest quarters, and doorways sealed with time. Every so often, the nightingale would let out a trill, like a question asked into the quiet. In one long-forgotten parlor, he found the walls whispering, not with words exactly but with feeling. There were faded portraits that seemed to sigh when music touched them. A child's chair left by the hearth. A tapestry, once bright with a story of a dancing fox, fluttered as if remembering its own laughter. The music seemed to wake these things, to ask them gently, "Do you remember when you were loved?" Finn passed a cracked mirror, and for a moment, he saw something strange. Not just his own reflection, but the faint outline of another boy beside him. Not a ghost, not quite. Just a memory, perhaps, the echo of another child who had once walked these halls and been forgotten. The nightingale's melody softened. It was not just a song now, it was a conversation. It drew out the feeling beneath the silence, the kind that builds when no one listens for too long. Finn sat down beneath a grand arched window dusted with cobwebs. Outside, the courtyard was still and silver in the morning light. He didn't speak, but the song did. It curved through the air like a ribbon, wrapping around the columns, brushing the ceiling. And the palace answered. A loose tile clicked back into place. A cracked window groaned and settled in its frame. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe let out a relieved sigh. Finn looked at the nightingale, whose wings moved slowly as if breathing. "Thank you," he whispered, not to the bird alone but to the space around him, "for remembering, and for singing back." Finn turned a corner and found himself in a narrower part of the palace. The servant corridors, tucked behind the grandeur like hidden veins. They were plain, with scuffed wooden floors and walls of washed stone, but there was something comforting about them. The silence here wasn't cold, it was resting. As he walked, he saw a young palace guard sitting alone near the armory door. He was barely older than Finn, with his helmet off and clutched between trembling hands. His eyes stared at the floor, and his shoulders were curled inward like a leaf folded against the wind. Finn paused, the nightingale quiet in his sling. Then slowly, gently, he took it out and wound the key. The song that emerged wasn't bold or grand. It was soft and steady, like footsteps in the snow or rain tapping a window. It moved slowly, deliberately, like the sound of a heartbeat finding its pace again. The guard looked up. His eyes were wide, not afraid but surprised. The melody wrapped around him, and the trembling in his hands slowed. He blinked, sat straighter, took a breath. I don't know what that is," he said quietly. "But it helps." Finn didn't answer. He simply sat down beside the guard, their shoulders just barely touching, and let the song continue. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The guard's breathing evened. His grip on the helmet loosened. His eyes, once fixed on the stone floor, lifted toward the high arched window across the hall. By the time the song ended, a little color had returned to his cheeks. Finn stood, gave the guard a nod, and continued down the corridor. Behind him the guard whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time that morning, the corridor felt alive, not with voices but with courage. The halls grew quieter as Finn climbed a narrow staircase he hadn't noticed before. It twisted behind the servant's wing and led him to a place nearly forgotten. The old nursery. The door creaked open. Dust rolled lazily through the sunlight. Inside, the room was full of soft edges and faded colors. Tiny chairs, a rocking horse, books with curling pages. Toys sat in stillness, some with missing parts, others gazing blankly from shelves. Finn stepped in and felt a hush settle around him, not cold or lonely, but waiting. He wound the nightingale. Its song began, soft like lullabies sung through doorways at bedtime. It wasn't perfect. It skipped and hesitated, as if trying to remember something half forgotten. And then it found a rhythm. The melody was warm, slow, and sleepy. A tune with no words, but filled with the feeling of safe arms, quiet stories, and the rustle of blankets being tucked in. The rocking horse creaked gently in reply, as if moved by a breeze. A small mobile above a crib twirled slowly, casting star-shaped shadows on the wall. A stuffed bear in the corner slumped forward, just a little closer to the song. Finn walked among the toys, touching each one with care. His fingers paused on a wooden music box shaped like a moon. It didn't work anymore, but as the nightingale sang, it clicked once. Just once, like it was listening. There were names etched into the wall, childish carvings of princes and princesses long grown and gone. Finn traced one with his finger. Elian. Someone who once sat here, hearing the same lullabies. This was more than a room. It was a memory folded in time. Finn sat in the middle of the rug, cross-legged. He closed his eyes. And for a moment, he wasn't just a prince or a shadow. He was a child. He was home. Later that day, as clouds began to gather over the palace towers, Finn wandered into a shadowy corridor he rarely saw, one that led to the king's study. He hesitated at the tall double doors. They were always closed, always silent, but today something called him through. Inside, the air was still, full of polished wood and the faint smell of ink and parchment. Books lined the walls in towering shelves. Maps were pinned to corkboards. On the desk lay scrolls, sealed letters, and a half-finished note. A ticking metronome sat motionless. Finn stepped inside, the nightingale quiet in his sling. He walked slowly, not wanting to disturb the room's heavy calm. Then he noticed the letters, some old, some very old, tied with faded blue ribbon. He untied one carefully and opened it. It was in his father's handwriting. But it wasn't to a courtier or advisor. It was to himself. A letter to young Finn, never delivered. The words were hesitant, raw. They spoke of wanting to be a better father, of feeling like time was always slipping away, of wondering if Finn would forgive him for being so distant. Finn's throat tightened. The nightingale stirred. Its song began. Low, like the turning of pages, the crackle of a hearth. It filled the room not like a performance, but like a presence. The papers fluttered gently in its wake. The metronome clicked once, then again, tock, 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 timing itself to the music. Finn sat in the great chair behind the desk. It was too big for him. His feet didn't touch the floor. But he held the letter, and he listened. And the study, once so silent, breathed again. Not with sound, but with meaning. With memory. Somewhere beneath the layers of duty and time. His father had remembered him. And now so did Finn. Finn stepped softly down into the belly of the palace, the place beneath the grand clock. Few ever came here. The stairwell was steep, the stone damp, and the air filled with a deep, mechanical hush. At the bottom he found it. A vast chamber like the inside of a cathedral, but instead of stained glass and altars, there were gears the size of wagons, pendulums that swayed like giants breathing, and spindly ladders climbing into darkness. But now it was still. The gears had stopped. He stepped forward. The only sound was his own breath, echoing. Then the nightingale stirred. It rose from his hands and fluttered ahead, landing lightly on a brass rail. Its tiny feet clicked against the metal. And then it began to sing. Not a loud song, not one of triumph, but a low, steady hum. A song like a heartbeat, deep and patient. As it sang, Finn felt it. Not in his ears, but in his chest. A thrum like something vast and ancient beginning to stir. And then, almost too faint to believe, he heard it. A rhythm. Not the tick of gears. Not the click of machinery. But something older. The sound of shared breath, of hands working together, of footsteps in the halls above. It was the sound of time lived. Not measured. The hidden rhythm beneath everything. The nightingale lifted its wings. A single light blinked high in the gears above. One pendulum creaked, then another. Finn didn't touch a thing. He only listened. And the mechanism slowly, shyly responded. Not with full motion, not yet, but with the promise of memory. Like a song trying to remember how it began. Finn stepped back, the nightingale returning to his shoulder. This wasn't about fixing. It was about reawakening. And the palace, beneath the metal, beneath the stone, was beginning to hear the music again. Later that day, drawn by a gentle pull he couldn't quite name, Finn made his way to the palace's long-forgotten music room. The doors creaked open, revealing a space wrapped in velvet silence. Dust lay thick on everything. On the harp with broken strings, the piano with its ivory keys chipped and curled with age, the rows of empty chairs, the music stands bent just slightly as if bowing to nothing. He stepped inside. The nightingale blinked, its jeweled eyes reflecting shards of light from the tall stained glass windows. It didn't need to be wound this time. Simply knew. Its song was gentle but playful, like laughter heard from another room. The room breathed in. The curtains rustled faintly. The harp gave a soft ping as one lone string tightened. A breeze fluttered through the sheet music piled on a nearby bench, sending one page spiraling into the air. Finn caught it. It was a lullaby, handwritten in faded ink. No title, just notes drifting lazily across the page. He held it close. The tune from the paper and the song from the bird began to align, like two dancers remembering their steps. The piano gave a quiet thunk, and then, plink, a single note by itself. Then another. It was as if the room had been holding its breath for years, and now it exhaled. Finn stepped up to the piano and touched a key. It answered him soft and low, not in perfect pitch but with kindness. The nightingale joined him, harmonizing, and together they played, not for an audience, not for applause, but for the room itself, for the air that remembered music, for the silence that had waited patiently to be filled again. And as the notes floated up to the rafters, even the cracked windows seemed to shimmer. The music room wasn't empty anymore. After leaving the music room, Finn wandered down the winding servant hallways, the places where the royal family rarely ventured. These halls were narrower, lined with scrubbed stone, and filled with the scent of bread, soap, and warmth. There was no grandeur here, but there was rhythm. He walked past the laundry room, where two maids folded sheets in perfect synchrony, their hands moving like mirrored dancers. A butler carried a tray of tea with the elegance of a well-practiced ritual. A gardener dusted his boots before entering, humming a tune as old as the soil. It was quiet but not silent. Every sound here had purpose. And the nightingale, tucked close to Finn's heart, began to hum. Not a song this time, but a soft echo, like it was recognizing something already in motion. Finn paused beside the scullery door. From within came laughter, not loud but real. Inside, a cook stirred a pot while a young girl peeled apples nearby. They weren't talking much. They didn't need to. Their hands moved to a rhythm so natural it didn't need to be spoken. Finn watched, then slowly stepped inside. The cook looked up and blinked. "You're one of the little royals, ain't you?" Finn nodded shyly. "Come sit then. No need to be fancy." He did. The girl handed him an apple and a paring knife. Finn had never peeled anything before. But as he watched her, he picked up the rhythm. Slow, steady spirals of skin falling to the floor like ribbons. The nightingale let out a single soft note. The girl smiled. "That's a pretty toy." "It sings," Finn said. "I can tell." They peeled apples until the bowl was full, and the kitchen smelled of warmth and cinnamon. For the first time, Finn felt not just welcome, but woven in. The servants' rhythm wasn't loud, but it was strong. Finn moved deeper into the palace, guided now not by hallways or memory, but by instinct. He entered the Hall of Mirrors, a place so grand it had once hosted royal balls and diplomatic feasts. Now it stood empty. Its great chandeliers hung like frozen stars. The mirrors lined every wall, tall and gleaming, reflecting reflections until they seemed to stretch into forever. But the silence here was different. It wasn't waiting. It was hollow. The room sparkled, but the sparkle felt lonely. Finn walked forward slowly. His footsteps echoed too loud, too sharp. The nightingale stirred but did not sing. Even it seemed unsure here. The mirrors reflected everything. His face, his hesitation, the bird on his shoulder. But none of it felt real. As if he were surrounded by copies of himself who didn't truly see. He stopped at the center. The air felt colder here, though the sun still poured through the windows. The chandeliers didn't move. The polished floors didn't respond to the warmth of his presence. This room had been built to impress, but it had forgotten how to care. Finn wound the bird, hoping the music would bring the space back to life. But the first note was too bright, too sharp. It echoed harshly in the mirrored chamber and made Finn wince. He quickly silenced it. And in the hush that followed, he understood. This was not a place that needed more music. Needed kindness, realness. He looked at his reflection, then closed his eyes. And in that moment of quiet, he whispered, "It's okay to rest." The mirrors didn't sparkle. They didn't echo. But something shifted. The room didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Because in all its glittering shine, someone had finally been real here. As the late afternoon sun stretched golden fingers across the palace walls, Finn followed the light toward one of the oldest parts of the castle, the royal library. The door creaked open with the soft sigh of old hinges. Inside, the air smelled of vellum, dried lavender, and stories long asleep. Shelves curved like waves around the room, packed tightly with books of every age and size. At the center, on a cushion that had once been red but was now more rust than ruby, sat the royal librarian. She was small and round, with spectacles perched on the edge of her nose and hair like unraveling scrolls. She blinked up as Finn entered. "Well, bless my bookmarks. A royal visitor," she said, her voice crackling like parchment. Finn smiled and held up the nightingale. "Do you know anything about old songs?" "My dear," she said, adjusting her glasses, "I know songs that were sung before your great-great-grandfather had teeth." She shuffled over to a crooked shelf and pulled out a weathered book with a cover that shimmered faintly. "This one," she said, handing it to Finn. "It's not music written in notes, but in memory." He opened it. There, nestled between yellowed pages, was a slip of paper. A lullaby, handwritten in soft ink, the words barely clinging to the page. The librarian hummed. The nightingale echoed her gently, and the tune grew clearer with each note. "I remember this," the librarian whispered. "Your mother sang it once long ago, when she was small." Finn's eyes widened. He read the words aloud softly. The melody formed in the space between them, the nightingale lending shape to memory. It wasn't just a song. It was a thread, woven through time, hearts, and hush. And in that little circle of golden light, between one boy, one bird, and one very old librarian, a lullaby returned to the world. Not from paper, but from love. As evening deepened and shadows stretched long across the stone paths, Finn heard something he hadn't expected: voices. Children's voices. He followed the sound, soft and drifting, like laughter remembered in a dream. Near the palace's outer courtyard, where the marble gave way to grass and crickets had begun their quiet chorus, he found them. A small group of children, palace staff's little ones most likely, sat in a circle near the fountain. They weren't playing loudly, just sitting together, their heads tilted slightly, as if listening to something in the wind. And then Finn heard it too. The nightingale, still nestled in his sling, had begun to sing again, but this time not alone. One of the children hummed. Then another. The youngest one clapped gently in time. None of them had seen the bird, and yet somehow they knew the tune. It was simple, familiar, the kind of melody you hum without knowing where you learned it. A tune made of starlight and sleep, of kitchens and quiet steps, of lullabies and leaf fall. Finn stepped into the circle. The children didn't stop. They looked up, smiled, and made space. He sat. The nightingale rose into the air, glowing a little brighter now, and the children's hums deepened, each one adding their own note, their own rhythm. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Together, they created a song no one had written, but everyone somehow remembered. One child added words, nonsense probably, but they fit. Another clapped a counterbeat with soft hands. The smallest one yawned mid-tune and nestled against a friend. Finn looked around the circle and saw something he hadn't seen in all the mirrored rooms, all the grand chambers. Connection. Not built of rules or gears or expectations, but of joy. Her joy. And as the stars filled the sky, their little tune drifted upward, quiet, warm, and strong enough to echo through the tallest towers. The rhythm had returned, and this time it belonged to everyone. The next morning dawned soft and slow, with pale sunlight brushing the palace rooftops like a whisper. Something had changed. It wasn't the bells, they were still quiet. It wasn't the gears, they hadn't turned. But the people were different. The cook in the kitchen sang while stirring porridge. A sleepy guard chuckled at a joke whispered from across the gate. In the royal garden, a maid paused her sweeping to pick a flower and pin it behind her ear. The air had a hum to it. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. The rhythm was back. Not the strict, precise rhythm of ticking and talking, but something gentler. A rhythm made of breath, kindness, and shared mornings. And then, just after breakfast, as the sun crested the far tower, the grand royal clock began to chime. Once, then 12 times, slow and golden. The sound was not loud or sharp, it was warm, full of brass and memory. It didn't clang or command. It invited. People stopped. Heads turned. A child dropped a spoon, smiling wide. Up in the tower, the great hands of the clock moved again. Slowly, calmly, as if they too had taken a breath and remembered their purpose. The engineers rushed up with tools, only to find that nothing had changed. And yet everything had. They didn't understand it. But the queen, standing beneath the great dial, smiled. She didn't look up at the clock. She looked at her son, standing beside her, the nightingale in his hands, still and glowing faintly. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't ask how. She simply said, "Thank you." Finn didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. The bird gave a single, quiet click. And the palace, as if exhaling, settled into its new rhythm, one not counted by seconds, but by moments that mattered. The palace didn't return to what it had been. It became something better. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. In the days that followed, small things changed. Laughter returned to the halls, not the kind for show, but the kind that slipped out naturally. The guards whistled. The cooks sang more often than not. The great halls felt lived in, not just walked through. Even the king changed. He no longer walked like a ticking metronome, but like a man who had stopped listening only to time, and started listening to people. Finn saw him in the garden one morning, bending awkwardly to tie a dropped ribbon into a flower bush. When he straightened, he looked surprised to see Finn watching. But instead of turning away, he smiled. A real lopsided smile. "Your bird," he said softly, "reminds me of something I forgot I needed." Finn nodded. The queen spent more time with her children, especially Finn. They walked often, no longer just down marble halls, but through kitchens, studies, gardens, and unused rooms she'd forgotten existed. She listened to his silences the way others had once ignored his words. Even the palace itself seemed to exhale. The chandeliers no longer gleamed cold and untouched. They caught the light like laughter. The halls no longer echoed with emptiness, but with footsteps and music and breathing. And everywhere, the nightingale went with Finn, sometimes singing, sometimes quiet, always listening. When children ran past, it chirped softly in greeting. When the court felt anxious, it hummed a note of calm. It didn't control time, but it reminded people to feel it. Not to measure life by seconds, but by moments shared. And Finn, once the quiet boy in the corner, became something else. Not louder, but seen, trusted. He didn't change who he was. The world changed because of who he was. And at the heart of it all, one boy, one song, and a palace learning to breathe again. Up in the attic, where the story had begun, Finn sat once more. The sunlight poured in through the crooked window, turning the dust into golden snow. Around him lay the quiet shapes of forgotten things. Wooden toys, old banners, trunks filled with costumes that once made kings of children. The nightingale rested on the windowsill, silent for now, but warm to the touch. Finn didn't need it to sing. Not today. He looked out across the rooftops of the palace. The bells had chimed earlier, and the gears had turned. But it wasn't the sound of ticking that filled him. It was the memory of music, of people, of kindness returned to its rightful place. He pulled his knees to his chest and leaned against a pillow that had long since lost its fluff. The room smelled like lavender and old velvet. It didn't feel forgotten anymore. Felt quiet in a good way. Below, he could hear the clatter of breakfast trays, the low hum of servants chatting, and distant laughter drifting up like a lullaby. Finn smiled. The palace had changed. Not in shape but in spirit. And maybe the world outside hadn't noticed. Maybe the rest of the kingdom still believed the grand clock had been repaired by clever hands and ticking minds. But Finn knew. The clock hadn't needed fixing. It had needed feeling. And the nightingale, in all its gleaming silence, had reminded them how. Finn looked at the bird. It blinked once, as if in agreement, and tucked its wings with a tiny click. Then he closed his eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. To let the rhythm of everything, not minutes, not seconds, but life, wrap around him like a blanket. And high in the attic, in the warm hush of memory, Prince Finn was no longer forgotten. He was home. Now, little one, let your thoughts drift softly, like dust in golden light or music that hums in your chest long after the song is over. The palace is quiet now. Not from emptiness, but from peace. Somewhere, Prince Finn still sits in the attic, curled beneath a faded blanket, listening. Not for ticking or chiming, but for the small, steady rhythm of a world that finally remembered how to breathe. Outside, the nightingale perches beneath the moon, wings tucked, heart still warm. Its melody has faded into silence, but only because it is no longer needed. The song has settled into every corner of the palace, into laughter, into footsteps, into the creak of windows being opened again. Time hasn't stopped, has simply softened. Let that softness wrap around you now. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breath slow. Listen, not with your ears, but with the part of you that knows the hush between heartbeats. Because even here, even now, the music remains. You carry it with you. The tick of kindness, the hum of joy, the lullaby of being seen, not for noise or grandeur, but for simply being you. So close your eyes gently and drift. The night is here. The story has been told. And you, little dreamer, are exactly where you're meant to be. Sweet dreams.